Continuation of Psachim Perek Zayin, we're holding by Mishnah Yud. Ha'atzamois v'hagidin v'hanoisor yisrufu b'shisha osar. The meat of the Korban Pesach must be eaten on the first night of Pesach and may not be left over past that time. If anything is left over, it must be burnt. As the Torah says, you shall not leave any of the Pesach until the morning. Any of it that's left until morning you shall burn in the fire. However, parts of the animal that cannot be eaten, either because they're not edible or because it's usher to eat them, do not have to be burnt and can be simply thrown away. The Mishnah teaches which leftovers are burnt and when they are burnt. So hatamis v'hagidin, the bones of the Korban Pesach that contain edible marrow, although the bones are not edible, the marrow inside them is edible, since it's also to break a bone in the Korban Pesach, as we'll learn in the next Mishnah. The moyach, the marrow, cannot be taken out and eaten. It therefore becomes nicer and must be burnt. Even after they become leftovers, the bones may not be broken. Therefore, the marrow cannot be removed to be burnt, and the bones themselves must be burnt. So, and the gidin that are customarily not eaten, the gidin a lot of times are very hard, or let's say like hanasha, that's something that's asur min haTorah. The Rav says shein asurun ba'achila pein chayav alei min haTorah. The part of the gid hanasha that's asur min rabbanon. You're going to shum noishel gid hanasha. The fat on the gid hanasha shum mutter elo sheYisrael kadoshim nagu ba'isr. There's something that really min haTorah it's mutter, just that Klal Yisrael Kadeshim, as the Gemara calls them, Nagu Ba'isr. Or Inami, Hagid Hachitzain, the outer sinew, Hasamuch Lavasar, Shu Asar Vein Chayavan Alav, Minatar Have Naisar. So Minadaira it's nicer, if it gets left over, you have to burn it. Well, the Achli Yavshid Rabbanon Asru, but to eat it, we're not allowed to because Rabbanon Asred it. Mahanoisar, and any leftover uneaten meat, Yisrufu B'Shisha Asar, has to be burnt on the 16th of Nisan, which is the first day of Chalamoid, and not on the 15th, which is Yontif. Chal Shisha Asar Lias B'Shabbos, Yisrufu B'Shiva Asar. The 16th falls out on Shabbos, they're burnt on the 17th, Lefi, She'en Adaychim Leis HaShabbos, V'Leis HaYontif. Because the mitzvah of burning Naisar does not override either Shabbos or Yontif. Mishnah Yud Aleph. Kol Hanechel B'Shar HaGadol, Yeyochel B'Gdi Horach. Every person is required to eat a kezayis of meat from the Korban Pesach. We will learn in Perek Ches that when people register their memana on a Korban Pesach, they must calculate the size of the animal to ensure that there will be a kezayis for meat for every single person in the group. The Mishnah defines which parts of the animals are considered meat. So kol hanechel b'shar hagadol, anything that can be eaten in a fully grown ox, whose limbs have fully matured and hardened, yeyochel b'gdi horach, is eaten, it's considered edible meat in the Korban Pesach, which is a tender lamb or a kid. The Korban Pesach can be as young as 8 days old, and much of the skeleton of such a young animal consists of soft cartilage, which hardens into inedible bone as the animal matures. Many parts of a young animal that are soft and edible will harden and become inedible as the animal matures. Only parts that are edible in an adult ox are considered edible meat in the Korban Pesach. Even though the Korban Pesach must be a sheep or a kid, which is a baby goat, the determination of what's considered basar is based on an ox. Parts that are too hard to be eaten in an ox are not considered edible meat in the Korban Pesach, even if they are, in fact, presently soft and edible. Therefore, one cannot fulfill the mitzvah of eating the Korban Pesach by eating these parts. V'rasha knafayim v'haschusim. And the cartilage at the end of the shoulders and the other cartilages are considered edible meat in the Korban Pesach, since those of an ox can be eaten if they're cooked for a long time. For example, the hard tissue on the ribs and the chest, as well as the middle part of the ear. Although the cartilage in an ox cannot be eaten easily, it's edible if it's cooked for a long period. This is enough to consider these parts edible meat in the Korban Pesach, even though they may not be cooked, which must be roasted. The Torah asks a person to break a bone in the Korban Pesach. The Mishnah teaches when this Isra applies. One who breaks a bone in a Korban Pesach that's tahor, which means it's a kosher, a carbon, that everything is well with it, he gets 40 lashes. If he has transgressed the Isser of a etzem l'sishbiru bay. This is a standard punishment for being over on a lav, is being like arbaim. Now, hareza like arbaim, this applies only to a bone. The etzem l'sishbiru bay applies only to a bone on which there is a kezayis of meat, or a bone that contains edible marrow. If a person breaks a bone without meat or marrow, he does not receive malchus. Avla meiser batahar, someone who leaves over meat even from a Korban Pesach that's tahor. Vashever batame, or somebody breaks a bone in a Korban Pesach that's tameh, einay loikes arba'im, he does not receive 40 lashes, he doesn't get any malchus at all. Although it's also to leave over noiser from the Korban Pesach, one who does so is simply required to burn the meat and is not chayiv malchus. Wherever the Torah gives a specific commandment for a person to follow when he's over an Isser, he does not receive malchus for the Isser. This is known as a lav hanitik la'aseh, a prohibition that's corrected by a commandment. Therefore, in our case, when the Torah says that you should not leave over any of the Korban Pesach until morning, and follows that by saying any that's left until morning you shall burn in fire, which is a mitzvah saseh, a person who's over on this Isser must follow the commandment of burning it, but is not mechuyev malchus. This applies whether a person leaves over meat from a Korban Pesach that's tamei or tahor. In either case, he's required to burn the meat and does not receive malchus. The Torah says this Isser to break a bone in the Korban Pesach applies only to a Korban Pesach that's tahor. Therefore, a person who breaks a bone in a Korban Pesach that's tamei does not receive malchus. The Torah says ve'etzem le'sishberu boy. The Chachamim teach that the term boy implies that the Isser applies only to the Korban Pesach that the pasuk is discussing, which is a valid Korban Pesach and not one that is tamei. This would apply even in the case of the Korban Pesach is mutter to be brought in a state of tumah, as we learned in Mishnah Vav that when there's a kohol that's tamei, a person who breaks a bone in such a Pesach does not receive malchus. Mishnah Yud Beis. Eiver sheyatza miktsasei. We learned in Mishnah Test that if part of a Korban Pesach is taken outside of Yerushalayim and Erev Pesach after it was shechted, it becomes puzzle and it must be burnt. If only part of an Aver was taken out, and that part that was taken out becomes puzzle and must be burnt, but the rest of the meat on that limb, on that Aver, is still valid. However, the disqualified part cannot simply be chopped off and removed because it's forbidden to break the bone of a Korban Pesach, as we learned in the previous Mishnah. So what do we do in this case? So Ever sheyatza miktsasei, if part of a limb from a Korban Pesach was taken out of Yerushalayim, since the Korban Pesach may be eaten only in Yerushalayim, it may not be taken out of Yerushalayim. By the same token, since the Pesach must be eaten in a group, any part that's taken out of the area where that group is sitting during the night on which it's eaten also becomes disqualified, as is discussed by Arichos in the Gemara, that a person may not leave from the makam of the chabura where he's sitting, where he's eating. So he should cut into the meat all around the limb at the place where the disqualified meat begins until he reaches the bone. He should then peel the meat that's still valid, that's still kosher, off the bone until he reaches the joint where that bone connects to the next bone, then cut through the joint to separate the bones. Although the bones may not be broken, the tendons that connect the two bones may be cut to separate them. The meat was not taken outside, which he has peeled off the bone, is eaten, and the meat that was taken outside has to get burnt. In addition, if the bone contains marrow, that bone must be burned as well. The Mishnah contrasts this with the other karbanos, in which the meat was taken chutz. He cuts through the bone with a cleaver to remove the disqualified part, because there's no isser against breaking a bone in any carbon besides the Korban Pesach. It would be kedai to go through the Sefer HaChinuch that explains what this isser of breaking the bones in the Korban Pesach is all about, which we'll see after the Mishnah. Before we go into Mishnah Yud Gimel, we'll go through what this is. Inward of the doorway of the city gate is considered inside Yerushalayim. Meaning it's still considered pnim, it's not considered yoytze. And outward of the doorway is considered outside Yerushalayim. The gates of Yerushalayim had thick doors that opened inward. The doors, when closed, filled only part of the gateway and rested at a doorstop. The doorway here refers to the space the door occupies when it closes, which is the space from the inner edge of the gate until the doorstop. Inward of the doorway is considered inside the city, and outside the doorway is considered outside the city. As for the space of the doorway itself, in Yerushalayim, that space was considered to be outside the city. However, legabe, most of the she'orim of the Beis HaMikdash, which is relevant for other karbanos, for kachay kachim, the space of the doorway itself is considered to be part of inside the Beis HaMikdash. So min ha'agav l'fnim kil'fnim, min ha'agav l'chutz kil'chutz, ha'chalonos v'oiv ha'choyma kil'fnim. The windows and the walls and the thickness of the actual walls are considered inside Yerushalayim, and the Pesach may therefore be eaten in a window or on top of the city wall. Now let's just see quickly what the Sefer HaChinuch says, l'gabe shir se'etzem of the Korban Pesach. Now, Mitzvah Shem, we're going to be learning Sefer HaChinuch. We'll go through it more with more of an oimek, but let's just read through what he says. Mitzvah Tezayin, Shalei Lishbar Etzem in HaPesach, you should not break the bone of a Korban Pesach. Shalei Lishbar Etzem Mikol Atzmas HaPesach, not to break any bones from any of the bones of the Korban Pesach. Shenemar Be'etzem L'Sishbar B'ay, shall not break any bones of the Korban Pesach. Mishor Sheh HaMitzvah. The idea of understanding this mitzvah is Lizkar Nisei Mitzrayim, to remember the miracles that happened in Mitzrayim. Kamesha Kasavnu B'Acherais, like you mentioned, by the other mitzvahs, and all the mitzvahs of the Leil HaSeder, and many, many other mitzvahs also are Zeichel L'Tzias Mitzrayim. V'Gamzei Gizay Min HaSherish HaNizkar. This is also mushrash in that idea. She'ein Kavod L'Sorim V'Yoyatzei Eretz Ligror Ha'atzamash L'Shavram Kiklavim. It's not respectful or honorable for officers and noblemen and the advisors of the king, the advisors of the land, to break bones and to start trying to remove the marrow from between them and to break them apart like dogs do. This is only proper for the poor, hungry, starving, famished people of the nation. And in the beginning, when we came to start off being the nation of priests and a holy nation, and every year at that time again, we have to go back to that state of mind that we were in when we originally got that Gdula, and we replay it every year. We take because of the action and the dimyan, what we're thinking about what we're doing. Nikva b'nafsheisenu hadavar lo'olam. This idea, this concept will become mushrash in our nefesh, in our soul, in our psyche, forever. V'al tachshav b'ni, and my son, don't think litveisal dvarai v'loymar v'lama yitzav v'yson Hashem yisbarach laskal el zichron noisanes. Don't say, well, why does Hashem give us so many commandments to remember this nes? Haloi b'zikaron echad yal adav machshav teinav leishachach mipizarenu. We could just, have a memorial day and remember Yetzias Mitzrayim on one day. And, if we have it every year, so we won't forget it. Why are there so many mitzvahs that revolve around Yetzias Mitzrayim? You should know. You're not asking this question from Chachma. Machsheves hanoyar yasiach l'daber kain. And only the young, nourish questions, nourish way of thinking is going to push you to ask such a question. Now, my son, understand and listen to what I'm saying. Bend your ear towards me to hear. Teach you very important yesodis about Torah and mitzvahs. That you should know. This is one place where he says it many times afterwards. A person is nimshach, a person works kafi the meisim that he does. A person's machshavas are going to be built up after the actions that he does, whether they're good or whether they're bad. Even a person who's a rasha gomer in his heart, in his mind, and he's only chasing after his yitzhahara, doing bad things all day. If his spirit awakens, if a person who is doing all kinds of bad things is going to have an awakening and is going to put all his efforts in to be Isaac b'Torah b'Hasmada and to be Isaac in mitzvahs, even if he's not doing it for the right reasons, even if he's doing it for ulterior motives, this is going to start bringing him into the realm of doing things the right way. Why? Because when you do things not for the right cause, but you still push doing them, you'll end up doing it for the right reasons. Meaning that a lot of times a person doesn't want to show up to work because he said doesn't like it. Then he goes to work and he says, oh, he likes the taco, it's gishmak, it's good, it works out well for him. There's a lot to talk over here on this on these yesodis that he's saying. We're just going to read them, Mitzvah Shem, we'll get to them in a different shir. But he says, if a person should just do, even if he doesn't feel it, even if he's not connecting to it, he should still do these maisim, because that's how he's going to destroy the Yetzer Hara. Because after the actions, you're going to do them, then you're going to be wondering about why you're doing them. Why am I doing this? This is what Hashem said. Why did Hashem say Zech L'Tzias Mitzrayim, on and on? And this is how you will start. And it's interesting that he's saying this when he's talking about the mitzvahs of Reishis Knesas Adam L'Avodas Hashem. Like he says that this happened when we became the Am Segula of the Mamlechas Kohanim, V'Goy Kodesh. Even if a person is a complete tzaddik and his heart is completely connected to Hashem, and his heart is always desiring to do Torah and mitzvahs, if he wastes his time if he's Isaac in foolishness, for example, if a king gives somebody a job, a bad job, and he's hurt by it, he doesn't want to do it, so it's going to be bad for him. Why? Because he's going to be forced to do it because the king told him he has to do it. So if a person is a tzaddik and he's going to end up doing ma'asim, we'll say, well, what could the ma'asim do anyways? Listen, the ma'asim, I'm thinking about Hashem, right? He's thinking about Torah, and he really wants to do Torah and mitzvahs, but the ma'asim he's just sitting around all day, not being productive in Torah. It's going to end up being that he's going to leave the tzidkas liboy and turn into a Rosh Gomer. This is well known for MS, and it's true. If a person gets created based on his actions that he does, like we just explained. That's what the Chachamim say in Makkah, the Gemara Chav Gimel Amud Beis. This is one of the answers to the question that many Mefarshim ask, is that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted us to give us schar, so why do you have to give us so many mitzvahs, so many surim, so much? It's too much, so much stuff, right? But the zach is that every ma'aseh that you do, it's another ma'aseh to bring you closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a ma'aseh. If you'd only have 3 ma'asim to do, so then you only have 3 opportunities to connect to Hashem. But if there's so many opportunities that you have to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's so much that you could do. So what ends up happening is that he has so many more ma'asim that he connects to Hashem with, and those ma'asim is the M'shachim Alavavos. So I'm wearing tzitzis. Oh, why am I wearing tzitzis? I'm wearing yarmulke. Why am I wearing yarmulke? I make a bracha before I eat. Why am I making a bracha before I eat? I sit when I eat. Why am I sitting when I eat? Because I'm a mensch. And on. Each thing is nimshach and is mamshach a person to wonder about what he's doing, and ultimately it will make a big reishim on him to the point where he'll be Isaac b'Torah b'mitzvahs v'yizdar t'zayin l'shma. Kimitoich. The idea is kedei lahatus b'hen kol machshavosenu, to overtake our machshavos, so to speak. V'lias b'hen kol iskenu lehetuv lanu b'achrisenu. That every area of our life has Torah and mitzvahs involved in it. And that's exactly the point, that our entire life should be consumed by avodas Hashem, by doing mitzvahs. Because on the day these great pa'ulas that we're doing, we become better and we become good people, and we're zeicha to chaylam haba. There's a remez that Chazal say when they say in the Gemara Menachos and Gimel Amud Beis, anyone who has a mezuzah on his doorpost, the tzitzis bebigdai, and tzitzis attached to his clothing, the tefillin b'roishai, and he's wearing tefillin, muftach leish leyachta. It's a guarantee that he won't sin. Obviously, this is all going with the fact that the person is going to be thinking about these mitzvahs that he's doing. Right? The person won't be chayda because he's involved in a mitzvah. How many averos could a person do if he's davening? I mean, even if he's not davening with kavanah, how many averos is he doing with pile? Right? Therefore, you should pay close attention to what we're saying. Pay close attention to what your job is and what is your asik, what is your geschäft, what is your business. Even if a person is doing a lowly job, even if a person is doing a good job, a lot of times a person gets a job and he feels like he's not really roy for it, but he grows on the job and he matures into the job. He grows into the job and he matures into the job, and a lot of it is because he's nimshach halavavas achar pulas. You're not going to schlep him. It's going to get geschlepped after you. And you should not fall for the guarantee of Yetzirah that's going to say, being that I have complete amunah in Hashem, What's the big deal if I go and enjoy myself with people? To sit in the marketplace and on the streets, to sit around with the leitzim, with the people who mock all the dvarim chashuvim, the daber tzachos, or to talk stam dvarim be'almo, kayetz be'el dvarim shem mevin alei masham tzachatois, saying it's not a sin to go talk about the news, it's not a sin to talk about sports. Halagam li lev of k'mayhem. My heart is just like their heart. Tani avam imasneim. I'm much worse off than them, you could say. Why would it end up that I would end up following after them? Al bani, don't do this, my son. Hishamer mipneim, guard yourself from them. Penti lochet berishtam, maybe you'll get caught in their trap. Rabim shosum mitoich kach kais tarelosam. Many people, because of this krumah way of thinking, ended up drinking their poisonous cup. Please save your soul. After you understand this concept of and why we have so many mitzvahs that are revolving around Yetzias Mitzrayim, you won't ask this question anymore. Why there's so many mitzvahs about Zechirus Yetzias Mitzrayim? He's saying that the question of itself is a mistake. This is a very foundation of our Torah. The more we talk about it, the more we see we're being Isaac in it, the more we're going to wonder about, like, why are we taka doing this? Okay, that's the shmuz that he gives legabe the mitzvah of shaloi lishbor etzem and pesach. Dine ha-mitzvah, what's the halachas? What if it's after the zman achila? Or if there's a kezayis of meat still attached to the bone? Then haschusim, the cartilage, v'gidim, and the sinews harachim, shesefin his kashais, v'yesa prateha muvorim b'psachim, and all the other details are muvorim psachim daf pedalid, and on the Gemara of this mission that we just spoke. V'noiheges b'schor b'nekevis b'zman abayis. This mitzvah is noig with males and females b'zman that shebes amikdash kayom. V'oivel oleha b'shever etzem b'pesach tar, like a person who's over on this mitzvah and he breaks a bone of the korban pesach, that's tahar, he is like ad kan devrei hasefer hachinuch. Let us move on to Mishnah Yud Gimel. Shtei chaburais sheyoichlis v'bayis echa. Two groups are eating a single korban pesach in one house. The people who registered for korban pesach may divide themselves into more than one chabura to eat it. However, one person may not eat the korban pesach with more than one group. The two psukim discuss where the korban pesach offering is to be eaten. One pasuk says the houses in which they will eat it, which implies that a pesach may be eaten in more than one house. This refers to the korban itself, that a single korban pesach may be eaten by more than one group in more than one place, even in different houses. Another pasuk says, in one house shall it be eaten, which implies that it must be eaten in one house. This pasuk refers to the people eating the pesach and teaches that one person may not eat the pesach in more than one house, or even in more than one place in the same house. So you have shtei chabur sheu oichles b'ayis echad. Two groups are eating a single korban pesach in one house. These people may turn their faces in one direction and eat, and these people in the other group may turn their faces in another direction and eat. Although this makes it clear that there are two separate chaburas, there's no concern because the korban pesach may be eaten in more than one group. And for the same reason, a kettle of water that's used to dilute the wine may be placed even in the middle, between the two chaburas, even though it separates them. Wine in those times was very strong to drink on its own. It was usually mixed with warm water. Therefore, at the Pesach Seder, when people were drinking wine, they kept a large kettle of warm water in the room to be able to pour and be moizeg all the wine for all the people that are there. However, when the waiter who's sitting and eating with one of the chaburas stands to pour the wine for the people in the other group, as we know, the halacha is by the Leil HaSeder that we don't pour our own wine. You should have somebody pour for you, because that is minhag cherus, like noblemen and wealthy people. Kaifetz is pivu machzer panav. When the waiter pours the wine for the other people, he must close his mouth and turn his face towards his own group, until he reaches his own group, and then he may eat. Since a single person may not eat the Pesach with more than one group, the waiter who eats with one of the groups but serves both of them must be careful to keep his mouth closed and to face his own group when he's serving the group that he's not eating with. Said we're not chayshishim of eating with that other chabura as well. A kala who's embarrassed to eat in front of people may turn her face away from her group and eat. Since the Kala is the center of attention and people are looking at her, she's shy, she's embarrassed, she doesn't want to eat in front of people. So then, even though by doing so, it's as though she's eating separately from the Chabura, from which she is part of, this too is mutter because the Korban Pesach may be eaten by more than one group, as we mentioned before. Ad kan Perek Zayin.